This podcast doesn't have a sponsor, but it is brought to you by a shameless plug for myself. If you go onto my website and you can practice movement and meditation for a very small fee of €19 a month, you can cancel any time and you get a 3 weeks trial. That's kevinboyyoga.ie. Today, that was done in one go. Today I have with me Dr. Tom O'Brien. He holds an MA and a PhD in adult and community education, and he specialized in addiction, mental health, and community development. Tom manages an addiction recovery project called Sankalpa.
I used to.
Are you used to? Okay.
I'm gone from there about 3 years.
Tom used to manage this centre, and Tom has been a qualified herbalist since 2012.
Yes.
Brilliant. Tom is known as the Mental Health Herbalist on Instagram, and he has just over 37,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is I'm very jealous of. Tom, thank you.
No, it's a pleasure to be here, Kevin. Thank you for the opportunity for the conversation. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. How's your herbal tea?
My herbal robust, is it robust?
Yeah.
It's very nice. Very nice.
I was saying to Tom earlier, it's like with robust or rooibos, you have to commit to the pronunciation, then move on.
No, it's nice. It's warming.
That's great. Tom, it's before I brought you in, I was talking to Rach about you, and I was asking, because Rach is into aromatherapy, she's a holistic massage therapist, but she's been using herbs a lot during her pregnancy. And when you decide to delve into that world and you're not used to it, it's actually quite intimidating, especially in the pregnancy world, because a lot of women who are pregnant, a lot of people that are pregnant, it's an emotionally charged time of their life. And I've been looking with her on the forums, the pregnancy forums, and people are very opinionated. Can't take this, can't take that, and etc. But before we get into that, because I'm interested to delve into specific herbs, I've never met a herbalist.
Wow.
You're kind. So why did you decide to become a herbalist?
I had been living in Spain for 2 years up until 2007. My partner's Spanish, so I was giving that life a go. And I came back to Ireland for a job interview, which I eventually ended up working in Sankalpa in 2008. But a very good friend of mine, Joe Lucy, died suddenly. He was only 47. He had an aneurysm. And we had a lot of heart disease in my family background as well. My father died of a heart attack. My 2 uncles, his brothers, died of heart attacks, and my grandmother also had heart disease. So I kind of had been to a lot of funerals where we did the typical Irish thing. You have a fry and you talk about, this is the last fry you're going to have and we're going to eat healthily. But I seemed to be the only one that actually followed through on that advice. So I was kind of always moving towards, some consciousness around a healthier way of living. And how can you prevent heart disease? And when my friend Joe died, I was very thrown into a grief where I kind of felt I just had to do something. And to be honest, I could have done a knitting course, a painting course, anything. I just wanted to absorb myself in learning a new skill. But because I had this interest in holistic ways of looking at disease and addiction particularly, I came across this course in Portlaoise, looked interesting, went down for an interview, liked it, just signed up and went into it. And so it was kind of a circumstances got me there, but there was a backstory that kind of led me to that point. So, but I would say the strongest motivation in becoming a herbalist has been my work in addiction, and particularly here, which Sankalpa is only down the road from here, over in Ballybogan Road. So I was there for 8 years, and I saw what I would say is the overuse of medicine in terms of treatment of addiction. And, I saw the limitations of that. And I had seen that earlier because I had my PhD, as you mentioned earlier, was in adult and community education. I did a research project on a young person's program in Sean McDermott Street called the Crinan Youth Project. And basically what I did was an analysis of the knowledge used to treat young people with addiction. And the dominant knowledge is medicine. So my PhD had kind of critiqued the medical model of addiction. And during that time I was living in Kerry. My uncle had a house there. It was empty at the time. He had passed on. And I did a night class in Tralee called Holistic Health and Homeopathy, I think. And that was really just for myself. But my PhD was shaped a little bit by holistic thinking and by, looking for something more empowering for people. And so then, naturally, then becoming a herbalist became a step in that process. So, unfortunately, working in addiction services in Ireland, they're funded primarily by the health system, they're HSE, and they're not the greatest fans of holistic medicine. They're predominantly a biomedical model. So it wasn't really easy to practice as a herbalist in the addiction services, but we did use a lot of, natural teas, and we did meditation, we even did a bit of yoga, and so forth. But it was hard to really work, because there's a lot of risks in working with anyone who has an illness. And pregnancy, not an area I'm very good at, as a man maybe, but there are lots of herbs that are great for women. I find really easy to use them, but pregnancy is an area of risk, and we can get into that a bit later. But in addiction, you're dealing with people who've been suffering for a long time, and their drugs have become a way of, it's often referred to as a social blanket, which they wrap themselves in. So these drugs become a way to cope with life, basically, and they just get deeper and deeper into the addiction with different drugs. And so when you're a herbalist approaching somebody who's deeply addicted, there's a lot of risks. So it takes a long time, and it's one of the sort of potential weaknesses and strengths of herbal medicine is that it's perceived as slow, not quick. Like medicine is kind of has this reputation of being quick, fast, magic pill for every ill, whereas holistic approaches are slower because they don't work in that way. It's a totally different kind of paradigm. So yeah, I mean, I've been practicing privately then part-time myself based in Rialto. I rebranded myself a couple of years ago as the Mental Health Herbalist because I had this YouTube channel and I was trying to focus, and that focus, was on mental health. And I just, again, not just an addiction, but a depression, anxiety, there's a huge amount of people suffering. There's little opportunities. Many of them end up being prescribed medications. And I just really want to be a voice and an advocate and a place where people can explore, a non-medical approach.
Brilliant. My experience with herbs, when I was I'm nearly 39. When I was about, I would say 33, I had really bad digestion. I mean, really bad. At the time I was vegan. I don't know what the correlation, or if there is any there. There is a correlation there, but it was so bad, my digestion, and I had 2 endoscopies, 2 colonoscopies, I had samples taken, all that kind of stuff, and it's very unpleasant to getting a colonoscopy is unpleasant, but getting an endoscopy is even worse, I found. But it's very worrying because it's a part of your body where you don't really understand, and you just tend to ignore. And I didn't know what to do. I went to doctors, and when I went to the GP said to me, you have something called colitis, probably, and therefore you need to take these steroids. I went from the GP straight to the chemist, went into the chemist and bought these steroids that cost a lot of money, and it was a 6-week course. Then I got onto the Lewis, which is the tram here in Dublin, and when I was on the Lewis, I was reading what's in it, trying to understand it. And I thought, I'm just going to quickly Google the name of these steroids. And it was just all these forums of people saying, I never came off them. I became all these mad side effects. And then I was on my way to work. I got into work, and the guy who was sitting opposite me, he said, oh, you look a bit fed up. And I said, oh, I've just been to the GP, and he told me that I might have this thing called colitis. And my CEO at the time, the guy that owned the company, he had Crohn's. The guy opposite me, he was trying to console me. He said, oh, do you know what? I had the same thing. And I said, well, what happened to you? They said, they gave me these steroids, right? I did the steroids for a couple of months, and then the symptoms didn't go away. So they eventually removed my colon. And I was like, right. So I threw I tried to go back with the medicine, but the steroids, but they wouldn't let me go back, obviously, with them, but because they were so expensive. And then I thought, right, I'm not gonna. I traditionally, Tom, I wouldn't even take an aspirin, man. I'd be like real against anything like that. So then I went to the health food shop, and I just thought, why not? It's worth a lash. Went into the health food shop, and there's a girl there with a tie-dye bandana and baggy trousers, and she's very earthy, and she said, you need to heal. I said, yeah, I know that. She said, what's the issue? So she's a female, I'm a male. I'm kind of embarrassed to say I got the shits, basically. Like, help me out here. She says, what you should do is take oil of oregano. And I thought, this oregano, that's stuff you put in your pizza. Like, what use is that going to be for me? Not kidding you, Tom. Maybe I'm remembering this too fondly than it already was, but it was days and I was back. I was back, man. I was like, take it, and that was very powerful stuff. I remember a tiny drop in like a big glass of water, but I don't know what it did to my gut, but I was healed.
Yeah. I mean,
so I'm converted.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's great when people find. I used to have a motto before I became an herb medicine, as empowering medicine was my motto, because all medicine, first do no harm, and ultimately it should heal you. Medicine is ultimately about healing. But the modern kind of, there's many aspects of medicine, but one of the aspects of modern medicine is it's built around a business model, and that's still linked into prescribing and people being on medications for a long time, and that's seen as treatment. Treatment is not necessarily seen as treating something and then stopping the treatment, because you're healed. A lot of treatments now in modern medicine are long-term treatments, and therefore long-term medication, and there's all sorts of complexities that can arise because of different interactions and side effects, as you mentioned. But it's really interesting, your experience of oregano. I'm not surprised, because one of my own weaknesses is sugar. I'm just coming off this bank holiday weekend, I could feel it in my body. I'm back detoxing again. And sugar leads to Candida in the gut, and it's one of the things I have suffered from. And oil of oregano is one of the best. It's antiviral, antibacterial, and that's why it works so well. It helps balance some of, helps kill off some of the bad bacteria in the gut and rebalance the gut. And I'm becoming really interested in a concept recently called Psychobiotics, which is the whole study of how bacteria in the gut have a psychological impact or psychological effect. So it's the whole microbiome of the gut, the balance of good and bad bacteria. There are thousands of different types of bacteria in our gut, and funguses and viruses that all live in harmony normally. But because of the environment now we live in, a very stressful environment, stress is one of the biggest impacts in terms of our health. So a lot of stress is felt in the gut, and we then eat or drink or whatever to deal with that stress, and that just compounds the problem. I'm not sure what your history of the colitis was, but a lot of health issues, health starts in the gut and healing starts in the gut. And a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of research around the impact of gut health on mental health. So it's really important that people, trust their bodies, listen to their symptoms, and don't try and suppress them with medication, because that's, again, another aspect of the difference between holistic medicine and biomedicine is that, traditional or modern medicine, biomedicine tends to suppress symptoms, whereas herbal medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, natural medicine see symptoms as signs of imbalance, and in this case your gut out of balance. It was bacteria. Bring that back into balance simply with oil of oregano helped you in the longer term, because you would end up with other side effects from the medications, and as you said from the forums, people end up on them for a longer time. So I think we underestimate the power of food, the power of simple things, the power of nature.
Yeah. Even my sister, who I had dinner with last night, She lives right 5 minutes away. She's over there, but I'm going to give her exact address. But she has a massive garden, and in her garden, she started growing her own vegetables. Tom, mate, she looks great. My sister, she looks so vibrant. Hair looks amazing. Skin's great. Eyes are bright, and she's eating her own vegetables. She gives them to us as well. And I think there has to be a correlation there. And not just that, eating the vegetables, but also the process of growing them and being closer to nature.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
I actually want to ask you about the Candida diet or Candida in general, because I think from the research, me and Rach tried this, and it's really difficult to do the Candida. Essentially, and correct if I'm wrong, but it's like no sugar. And have you ever tried it, or do you know much about that?
No, other than, I'm not into kind of diets as such, work from the general principle of, as much plant-based food as you can, nuts and seeds as well, and lots of healthy oils. I'm not a vegan, small amounts of meat, can be beneficial to your diet. I'm more into the kind of environmental argument for meat. Meat is a big factor in our destruction of our environment, so that for that reason I wouldn't recommend too much meat. But if people have a small amount, so in terms of Candida, I think sugar is the biggest feeder of not only Candida but also cancer cells and anxiety as well, undermining the nervous system. So I find myself, when I'm like, the way I look at sugar is, I call it the bitter principle. So if I write a book, I'm going to call it the bitter principle. So the bitter principle is that we tend to lean away from bitter experiences and bitter feelings, like shame and hurt and anger and insecurity. So we sweeten those feelings with sugar. Sugar is it's a beautiful substance because it sweetens us. It reduces certain anxieties and stresses, but then we become dependent on it, brings us out of balance. Our nervous system becomes dependent on it, and it affects all of our overall health. So when I lean into the bitter, which is a kind of accepting the emptiness, accepting the nothingness, whatever, life isn't going as well as I'd like to expect it to go, whatever, relationships can be stressful, work can be stressful, and that's the here and now, and all of the meditation that we're trying to practice now in this more holistic world where it's calming ourselves, relaxing, not being stressed. So by leaning into the bitter, embracing the feelings, that's the only way I can beat the sugar. If not, I'm kind of using sugar to self-medicate. So look, I have 3 apples in my bag today. I bring for my lunch. That's what I'll eat between now and 4 o'clock. I'll come home at 5 o'clock, have a bit of soup or something to eat. And that's my, so I'm getting fruit sugar. I have maybe 1 square of white chocolate per day, maybe 2.
White chocolate?
Yeah, it's white. It's that little bit sweeter. Eluding myself,
Yeah.
But I'm addicted when it comes to sugar. I mean, if I have sugar, I want more sugar. So I have to be very disciplined, and I go through this cyclical process. So we do need sugar. We need sugar to convert into energy, and sugar is extracted from alcohol, it's extracted from bread. It's very hard to live without sugar, but I do think it's good to reduce your impact of sugar, intake of sugar. It's good to fast, have sugar-free days. It's good to have a period of a month with really low sugar. But I think when I work with a client who comes to me and they want to make a change, I always try and help them to make sustainable changes. So make one small change. So if sugar is the predominant issue in their health, I will try and work with them to try and reduce sugar, but not to change everything else. Just make one small change. Radical changes aren't sustainable. People don't just keep them going. They tend to relapse or for some reason get back into old habits. So in terms of Candida, if you're eating, a fairly healthy plant-based diet, you're taking, oil of oregano on, cyclical basis, like take it for 3 months, take a break for 3 months or 6 months, take it again. That's the way I would recommend herbs. Take them for 12 weeks, 3 months, take a break and so forth. Yeah, I mean,
it's tough, as you said. Maybe actually even thinking about it as a diet is the wrong mindset, because then it seems like you're restricting yourself, and it's only going to be temporary, as opposed to good habits going forward.
Yeah, try to build stuff into your life that you sustain, and as you say, good habits. Apple cider vinegar is also brilliant for a lot of health issues. It's a sour, you know what I call it, but it's pretty sour. It's on that bitter scale. But I find it great because my Candida comes out through my skin, in a kind of a rash, and I would just put a gentle bit of externally using, and it suppresses it inward, and therefore you have to be taken internally as well. So the more you reduce your sugar intake, the more you upset the bacterial balance, and you'll get fungi. There's a theory that the fungi and the bacteria are related to food craving. So depending on the balance of your gut, it will seek a food craving, and the fungi can come out in different parts of your body, your feet, in sweaty areas of your body particularly. Yeah. So, but we need that fungi in our system. That's why if you take too much oil of oregano, you can do to harm to your gut balance. So fermented foods, then of course they would be at the top of the pyramid in terms of health foods, but also for tackling things like Candida, because we're, like, as you mentioned, your sister growing organic vegetables at home. What they have is they already have these microorganisms inside, plant organisms living in the plant, and they're the bacteria and so forth that we need to maintain that gut health. So things like sauerkraut, kombucha, kefir milk, kefir water, all of these fermented. You can get fermented cheeses now. There's a great fermenter down in Wicklow doing fermented cheeses. Sourdough bread. I really love sourdough bread. Bit of olive oil, bit of salt. That's my breakfast with a bit of banana.
Nice. Yeah, but these foods don't seem traditional, especially in Ireland, because I lived in Korea, and in Korea they eat kimchi. That's because right, yeah. During the war they wanted food that they could store for ages that wouldn't go off. And even if you look at places like Denmark, they also ferment a lot of their food. So it's very common. But I think what has led us astray a little bit is the traditional food pyramid. And actually Rach was telling me about this, that she said it was in Sapiens, the book Sapiens, but talking about how we think of the pyramid, and at the bottom is all the or is it the carbohydrates at the bottom? That's the main thing we should be eating. But in fact, it should be flipped on its head. We should be almost eating, you could say, like a paleo style diet, as in vegetables, fruit, and nuts and seeds, as you were saying, and a little bit of meat. But I think a concept that we don't acknowledge enough is sometimes we talk about like being healthy and being at a healthy weight, but actually when you're overweight, from what I understand, as you just alluded to there, it's not you who necessarily craves the food, it's the
microorganisms, in your gut,
which is mad to think about.
No, that's it. And there's two researchers down in Cork who've written this book called Psychobiotics. I can't think of their names at the top of my head, but you can put the link in the description. But they're studying this, and I mean it's clear that we have more bacteria, microorganisms in our body than we have cells. And those people who are into consciousness thinking, and philosophers thinking about consciousness, ask the question then, what are we then? Are we human, or are we bacteria? And we're in this pandemic at the moment, and there are very few people talking about the immune system, talking about the threat of the virus and how dangerous it is. And it is dangerous, particularly for vulnerable populations. But we have to really realize that we are part of nature. Humans are part of nature. We live in nature. And there's even studies now coming out looking at how clean houses, particularly super clean houses, are bad for children's health, because we need to be exposed to natural microorganisms that are in our air, in our soil, in our environments. And it's our immune system then that prepares and builds up our protection for that. Now, in terms of the coronavirus, it's obviously a new threat, and our immune system collectively needs time to catch up. So that's going to take time. But we need to really work on our immune system, and that is then honouring that these microorganisms in our system need to be kept in tune and in balance. And if we're not maintaining that balance, modern kind of products. And there's a great book called Death by Supermarket. I don't know if you've ever heard of it,
No.
but basically the thesis is that supermarkets don't sell food. Now, that's not completely true, because if you go to Lidl, you get your organic vegetables, your vegetables, at least some of them are organic. So it's the idea that a lot of foods now have been turned into products. It's lovely, colourful packaging, a lot of psychology used to make it attractive, a lot of sugar in a lot of products. And so there's a move obviously back to, organic farmers markets, local, healthy, natural, green, plant-based, and that's really powerful. And supermarkets are catching up. So we need to take much more control over the food we consume. Food is medicine. Food is healing. If not, I like the principle 80-20, 80% good, 20% maybe pleasurable. I enjoy a glass of wine. I enjoy chocolate. I enjoy, an odd takeaway. We need to enjoy food. We can't be too intense about it or too serious about it. Food is a big part of our social rituals. It's a big part of how we connect with people, how we celebrate. And there's a real food revolution going on. I mean, there's so many new sources coming out, beautiful books coming out now, Fermented Foods, Natural Foods, and so forth. The Happy Pear leading the battle there. So yeah, I mean, food as medicine is a big thing, and you're lucky to have your sister growing your vegetables for you.
She's my supplier. But I mean, the massive benefit of the internet is that we can learn about very quickly about how other people live and other alternative ways to live than what we're told. I mean, very rarely, you never see an advert for kale. You see an advert for like bird's eye pancakes or whatever they may be.
Yeah.
But food is, especially when you're self-employed and you're working from home, food becomes a comfort. And even if I think there's a misconception that if you look healthy, you are healthy. Just because you're slim doesn't mean you're healthy.
No.
You may be malnourished, but you just happen to look a certain way. And I also experience, I think most people do, the sugar addiction. And you mentioned there about instead of succumbing to that, instead sitting with the emptiness, whatever it may be. And I know that sounds a bit maybe melodramatic, but in fact, it is important to recognize the root of addiction. I have people very close to me in my family that have experienced severe addiction and experienced that growing up. And sometimes you look at the person as like, why would you do this? As if it's like a choice, as opposed to this is someone that's suffering. They weren't. This is, I know, very what is it, like a rudimentary way of explaining it, but like to me, it's like someone who is trying to replace something. Now, I don't understand it as well as you do, but what would you say that the biggest misconception is about addiction that we have?
Yeah, I think the idea that addiction is a disease, basically a physical disease, meaning some pathology in your cellular structure or in your genetic structure, that in the medical model for interpreting disease involves questions about your parents, your genealogical background. Did your parents drink? Did they use drugs and so forth? So the way that addiction is diagnosed is also linked to parental inheritance. So that's, I think, a big misconception, that addiction is inherited. Now, we do inherit psychological and emotional pain from our parents and our family because they're not perfect and they have to grow up in an imperfect world, and therefore there's times we feel neglected and our needs were not met and so forth, and that can lead to insecurity. But I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions. But it's dominated by the medical model that have a monopoly on how addiction is shaped and treated. So if you take it from a different angle, as you were kind of alluding to, the idea that it's linked to social suffering, and we know that it is, and the research in psychology shows a lot of it is to do with attachment. Having poor attachments lead to people feeling insecure, and that can lead to finding ways to fill that emptiness and so forth. And so some people do become compulsive. I have compulsive behaviors. They're not harmful, but people who become addicted to a substance like sugar or alcohol or heroin or cocaine or tablets, they are leaning out of the bitter and way into the kind of escape, and it becomes a cycle. It becomes a way of coping. They talk about being learned behavior. So, I wrote a paper 2 years ago. I presented at a conference in Sweden called "The Medicalization of Social Suffering." Nobody was really interested in it. It's not a very popular paper.
It's niche.
Yeah, isn't it? It's very niche. But I'm very proud of that kind of exploration. I'd love to do more work in that area, because I do believe that all mental health issues, whether it be addiction, anxiety, are a form of suffering. So if we approach a person who's suffering from a compassionate point of view, from a holistic point of view, in terms of, some people are suffering because their identity is ruptured, in a sense that, if you're unemployed or you don't have skills to sell, you can feel unvalued. And we do undervalue unemployed people in society. There is a stigma attached to being unemployed. It's not something we honor the unemployed. We don't really. We protect them, we mind them, but we want them to get a job, pay their taxes. And that's okay. We need to live in this society. But there are other people stigmatized because of their sexuality, because of their ethnic origin, because of whatever. And when people in recovery, who recover themselves through NA and these support groups, they realize that social connections, new connections through these groups, the fellowship they call it, is probably one of the most powerful ways to recover, because you have somebody who's going to be your sponsor, they check in on you, they go for coffee, and you begin to feel human dignity and respect again. So it's a big area, but I do think that there's a growing recovery movement in Ireland, and it's a very different paradigm to the medical one, where the professionals do the treatment and they do the helping, they do the fixing. But unfortunately, I looked at the figures for methadone and methadone deaths in Ireland, for example. In the early 90s, in the mid-90s, when methadone was introduced first, and methadone is a very good drug. I'd love to be able to prescribe it myself. But the problem with methadone is, when it was introduced in the 90s, there was around 150 deaths per year. Now there's 600 deaths per year. So it has incremented, the number of drug-related deaths has continued to rise. It's stable around between 500 and 600. But every year now, around 500 or 600 people die from drug-related deaths. We have methadone, we have other medical treatments like benzodiazepines and so forth. And for me, the problem is getting bigger. There's an industry growing around addiction. More and more people are caught in addiction. People end up on medications for addiction for longer. People are finding it harder to get off those medications. And we need to... It's the same if you look at suicide. We need to look at why are people trying to escape from their situation. We need to find ways to help people have value and meaning and dignity. And I think that is at the core. And even at a more advanced level of development, where we're trying to raise our own consciousness, I think there is a need for a society that respects our human dignity and our purpose. Our purpose is not economic activity. I think a lot of what's called a neoliberal economy, it's just a way of describing, an economy that thrives on money. Therefore, people are seen as units of profit. And in this neoliberal economy, we value the economy more than the society. Now, in this pandemic, we've shown that we actually value the society, because we're protecting the society by somehow slowing down the economy. But we need to learn that and understand that everybody needs to feel human dignity and respect, and out of that they flourish. But it costs money to have that kind of society. It's a cheaper society to have people, just force people into work. If people can't get into work, then they feel stigmatized. They don't feel value, and we need to keep working on the social contract, the social. Invest in programs that get people to break the cycle of poverty, because we're still just kind of tinkering with the edges. We're in a very structurally unequal society, and we're not always, if you talk about Black Lives Matter, migrant issues, racism, we're sometimes dealing with things as they trend, but we're not just building in sustainable solutions where we all grow. Now we're getting better, I think, but you know, sometimes people feel we need to move a bit faster. And does that answer your question?
Phenomenal. I didn't want to say anything because that was so brilliant. You mentioned shame. I have said before that I understand why a man would kill himself if he couldn't look after his family. And as a self-employed person, I will work very hard. Like this is basically all I do. But you know, recently, well, there are times in life where you think like, can I actually like support my soon-to-be wife? We're about to have a kid and stuff. And I did have recently an episode where, or a situation where I felt like my career was under threat, as it were.
Yeah.
And I spoke to I won't say who, but I spoke to someone about this, and they asked me like, would you actually kill yourself? And I wouldn't, like when it comes to it. And the reason is because my mum and my dad like really loved me, you know, as in when I was growing up there, we had challenges and whatever, but fundamentally I felt loved. And I'm now in a very loving relationship where, although I want to be like the provider, as it were, and to give people a good life, I realize that's not what all my value is on. But I think that I'm so glad you said that. There is a lot of shame that people have behind being unemployed, and I think God bless America for a start. America's fantastic, whatever, but and you know, every day make it happen, and you know, even like they say, have a nice day now or have a great day, but really a lot of days aren't great. Yeah. And your capitalism has many benefits, but the downside of it is, as you said, you get forgotten about. If you fail, you're considered a failure. If you lose, you're considered a loser. Like, you're defined by that. And people will throw away that comment, he's a loser. Very like, and they don't realize the amount of shame that's behind that. And I'm kind of gone on a bit of a monologue here, but this is something I haven't never discussed with anyone actually, because me and Rach, and it ties into money and success. Like, sometimes you perceive someone to be successful, but the reality is, I live in like half a house, a flat, and we want to buy a house, right? And I thought, we'll live in this area, that area. We can't afford to live we can barely afford a house. I don't even think we'll get a house. We'll probably have to get another apartment without a garden. And we're going to be living in, I'm not going to shame any areas, but think of like the bottom three areas in Dublin that people would often consider to be like the roughest. That's probably where they're going to live, right?
That's where I live.
Okay.
Rialto.
So I'm not saying names, but because that might be my next neighborhood. But I said to my mum, like, Mum, you know, me and Rach are going to move. We're going to have our baby when the baby's a year old. We'd like to have a bigger place and our own place. And I named a couple of the places to my mum. My mum is like old school Irish Catholic, you know, religious iconography all over the house. Used to throw holy water on as we were leaving the house when we were going out on the town. And she said, I don't know, there's a lot of drug addicts there. Now, God bless my mum. She means the best, like she means well, but it's a different generation. She's like, well, I wouldn't bring up a child there because there's a lot of drug addicts there. And it got me thinking to myself, because of my financial situation, am I going to be relegated to live somewhere that's with loads of with people that are suffering from drug addiction? But the point I'm trying to get at, Tom, is that a stigma I have in my mind from my mother and other people? Or in middle class areas, there's much drug addiction, but maybe it's pills or something? Because what I do know is when you live in I'm from a working class area in the council estate. When you're from an area like that, people talk to each other. There's actually a community. Middle class areas, not so much. So what I'm getting at, Tom, is that an irrational fear that I have? And do you think that even if you grow up in an area that maybe has people that are addicted to drugs, that you can raise a child without that happening? Yeah. Sorry, that was a lot there.
Yeah, no, it's a very common sort of challenge or dilemma that people face, because I think behind the essence, say, of the experience of shame is this perception of what is success in society. As a man, how do I describe to my peers that I've made it? You know, what kind of car do I need to have? What kind of house do I need to have? The location of the house, the career, the qualifications, the salary that I'm on, and so forth. And that, I think there's a mythology in that, because we all buy into this model of society, and we work towards these kind of thresholds. I have now a house, I have it in this area, I have my car, I have my promotion. But we begin to, maybe in your 40s, if you're lucky, or if you're in your 50s, now I'm 53, you begin to realize what is more important is freedom and peace of mind. And this is the kind of, let's say, the nemesis or the opposite of shame. Shame is really a prison in which I've become trapped, because I'm not experiencing the hurt that is laid upon me. You know, I'm a failure, I'm unemployed, I'm an addict, I'm whatever. I'm not contributing to society, so I'm stigmatized. And we all, nobody wants to live with stigma, because stigma is psychological suffering, intense psychological suffering that does lead to people to commit suicide. So I think what we need to begin to realize, say, from the likes of Ram Dass, who has become a big influence in my life in the last 2 years when I discovered him, and he's towards the end of his life. I think there's a film now called Becoming Nobody, and there's a book where he began to epitomize his life's message in this phrase, becoming nobody, because he described himself as a somebody. You know, he was a professor in Harvard, he had his own private jet, he had a motorbike, he had this lifestyle. He grew up in a Welsh Jewish family in New York. But then he lost it all when he was sacked from Harvard, because he was exploring medical mushrooms and consciousness. And so towards the end of his life, then it's this idea of becoming nobody. We invest too much in our ego. My ego is, you know, I have a PhD, or I have this job or this status, but it's really my ego. It doesn't rescue me from my shame. And so by detaching from the ego, which sounds very easy, and becoming free from the labels, you know, we kind of value ourselves according to the labels people give us, and they're not really liberating. I'm not sure if I'm trying to explain myself well, but
no, you didn't.
Basically, the addict, in terms of who's on the verge of suicide because, you know, they can't see any hope. So imagine to be in a situation where you can't see any hope, so you contemplate suicide. You're so stigmatized, so shamed, so broken, and you're in a society where this is happening on a regular basis. And how do we create a society that doesn't shame and stigmatize people? Why does it matter where you live? Why does it matter what kind of job you have? Why does it matter what kind of qualifications you have? Because these are kind of hierarchies of which entrap us. You get, like in academia, I have a PhD, but I'm not a classic academic, because I'm a creative person. I'm a thinker. Even the idea of having a PhD and becoming a herbalist, people would think that's not good for your career. You know, herbal medicine isn't seen as very popular in academia. So I've made silly kind of choices that haven't led to more power and status, but have led to sometimes confusion, sometimes disorientation, sometimes feeling, I haven't succeeded, but then finding light and finding freedom and finding spaces where you can really become free. And freedom is the ultimate goal. The assumption of the capitalist society is the more capital you have, the more freedom you have. But there's a lot of research says that that's not true, and it's, you know, you build more walls and more barriers between you and your community. As you said, in working class communities, people have this stronger sense of neighbourhood, of their neighbours. They say hello to each other, and that is, Rialto, where I live, is a bit like that. Whereas in more middle class areas, there's this perception that, you know, you don't talk to your neighbours because they're all kind of watching the Joneses as such. And there's actually I love the whole area of research now, which is about the social cure. The social cure basically is the research into social connections, which we've been talking about earlier. The more social connections we have, the healthier we will be. As you described earlier, health, you can look healthy, it doesn't necessarily mean you're healthy. Health is have you good social connections? Have you vibrancy? Have you freedom? And have you choice? You know, so yeah, I think we have a lot to try and change in society. We have to keep believing in ourselves, even if nobody else is believing in us. We have to keep stepping outside our comfort zone. And, you know, it's the same for the addict who's really trapped. You know, for them to recover is really a long journey of stepping outside their comfort zone, because the comfort zone is where the drugs are. And to step out is to reduce your dependency on those drugs.
But I wonder then if you're in if you live in a neighborhood where a lot of people take drugs, the young people take drugs, what can you do as parents who have a child to ensure that they don't? I mean, are people led by their peers, or are they led by they see what their parents do? Like I am a very disciplined person, but that's like because when I was younger I wasn't disciplined, and I realized, if you actually be quite disciplined, loads of good things happen. So I would hope that my kids eventually will see me and be like, oh, dad gets up at this time every time, he does this, that and the other, and he kind of sticks by this, and they see that Rach is very disciplined in her own right, and very caring and very nurturing, and I would hope that would be enough for the kid not to then succumb to addiction.
Yeah.
But is that naive?
No, I think every parent. I'm not a parent, so I can only talk kind of from what I've seen. My nephews and nieces, cousins, and so forth, and friends. I think being a parent is a very challenging role. But I have this fantasy. If I was a parent, I'd be the kind of parent to throw my kid into the swimming pool, swim, bring them to the forest, and lose them for a little bit. Find your way back. You know,
Yeah.
I do see some parents overly possessive, in the sense that what can happen is that when a parent loses their identity to the identity of the parent, I think it's not good for the child. So it's like, you're my child, you'll do it my way, and it becomes a kind of a controlling relationship. Whereas a lot of the sort of stuff I see on social media in terms of good advice for building resilient children is having, you know, open conversations, you know, having rituals, making sure you have, you know, screen-free time, having conversations with children, having, you know, meals with children, trying to live in a bubble inside the wider bubble where, you know, there's a lot of pressures and peer pressures, but really becoming a stigma-free zone, a shame-free zone as well, where you can actually talk about stuff that is difficult, having difficult conversations with children. You know, probably, you know, you've seen the films, you know, there's one that comes to mind, I can't think of the name of it, but it's basically allowing children to challenge their parents in conversations about life, and parents being allowing themselves to be educated in that conversation, rather than, I think that the thing is, if we control other people, we don't nurture freedom, and therefore they're more likely to succumb to peer pressure because they're rebelling. You know, now
that's a good point.
again, there's a lot of research done on addiction in terms of around, you know, peer, what they call twin studies. So they study twins that were adopted out to different families that came from alcoholic families and so forth. There's different variables, and they see what is the influence. Why does one twin become addicted and another doesn't? And it's very complex, and there's no easy answer. But I think I love the work of Brené Brown. She talks a lot about vulnerability and shame. And for me, she's the go-to expert in terms of trying to, you know, future-proof your children, you know, to be, you know, confident in themselves. Like, confidence is not, the misperception of confidence is that it's about being strong and knowing everything. Confidence is more about being vulnerable, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, going against the grain. We're all in situations where we kind of don't speak up because, you know, we're afraid to not be liked, or we want to fit in, or we don't want to challenge, or we don't want conflict. But there is a need to find a way to speak out against injustices or unfairnesses in a way that's compassionate, in a way that's loving, and in a way that's non-threatening. So, yeah, good luck.
Yeah, I think that it's something, I suppose, you have to release a little bit of control. You can't try to manage absolutely everything, because it's just that's no way to live. And what you said there about letting the person rebel to you is, or the person as in the child, is so important. It might be a case that I'm kind of overthinking this a little bit, and maybe as well some things become instinctive, and you just that's just how it.
I think so, and I think sometimes no matter what we do, it's kind of nearly too late to do anything. It's the sense that we will transfer onto our children unconscious anxieties and unconscious biases. So I think, the more it's to be like, the parent is not a finished, like the baby looks like an emerging product as such. It's a new, it's growing, it's going to evolve. And the assumption is that the parent has evolved and it's fixed. But I think it's the idea to keep yourself evolving, allow yourself to evolve, and allow that relationship with your child to become a kind of a new map to explore, parenthood. Because there is a thing called postnatal depression for men. I'm not sure, is that the right term? That men can also suffer after the birth of the baby, because it's challenge. It's a new role, and maybe you have less time for what you normally do, and you have a new focus. So I think there's a lot of things misunderstood or not understood for men in general, and then men who are parents. And I really liked your interview with Dara Stewart, the Men in Circles. I've started following him, and I liked that kind of approach, because I do think that there's a need for men as well to find archetypes and ways of thinking about themselves that it's not based on the macho survivor, fixer, doer, bringer of food.
Yeah, exactly, bringer of food. Yeah, that conversation with Dara, after I had that with him, I started, like, sometimes me and Rachel watch, say, romantic comedies, rom-coms, and I thought to myself, rom-coms have got a lot to answer for. I mean, they paint a picture that men are always charming, say the right things, and when you end up together, that you're going to be happy then together, and it's not like being a parent or a person. It's not a work in progress, and how and often a lot of love, how it's shown on TV and in the media, is how to acquire love, and then or how love ends. It doesn't show actually the being in love bit. And and work, and the same way you have discipline about exercising or eating, do you have discipline to, like, give your partner a kiss or a hug, or to ask them if they're okay, and actually listen to them? And all of that requires being more mindful. And I'm really conscious of this, like how much I use my phone lately, and when I eventually do become a parent, will I be looking at my phone a lot like I am now? Even Rach said it to me last week. She goes, Kev, I've noticed, like, the last week you've really been glued to your phone. I take it everywhere with me, and it's something I need to kind of keep myself in check about. Tom, I'm conscious of your time. I wanted to ask you though, Rach, as you know, and I know pregnancy is not your thing, and that's fine, but we wanted to understand, as a household, what would be like the kind of the go-to or the essential herbs that every household could have or should have, maybe?
Yeah. So, like, the main thing with pregnancy is caution. So that's the main principle. There are herbs that you can use. So then in the general household, what herbs would be great? I think everyone should have chamomile. Chamomile is so relaxing, it's calming, it's a sedative, it's great for promoting sleep. So it's an anti-stress herb. Valerian root is one of my favourite nervous system herbs to relax. All my favourite herbs are for the nervous system. And hawthorn, well, hawthorn is for the heart, and that's an important part of the nervous system as well. So you can have hawthorn tincture. The hawthorn berries will be coming out in August, September, and it's very easy to make your own homemade tincture buy a basic vodka alcoholic drink, and you make your tincture by put the berries into a mason jar, fill it with the alcohol, leave it there for about 2 weeks, stir it each day, and then drain it off, and you have the tincture of the hawthorn, which is a really beautiful medicinal tonic for the heart. So you have your valerian root, then you can buy that in capsules, tincture, but you can also get it in the root form, make a tea or decoction, and that's really calming. So they would be nice nervous system herbs. Then something for the lungs, because a lot of health issues arise in the lungs as well, and to do with grief and loss, the energy of the lungs is a lot about letting go. So we need to nurture the lungs. And mullein is a beautiful herb for the, you can get mullein tincture, mullein tea. Mullein is a really nice herb. Then you have the usual rosemary, great for boosting clarity, concentration. People use it a lot in medicinal cooking, but you can make a rosemary tea. You can add sage. Sage is a really nice dried sage for hormone balancing for women particularly, but also for men. So what else do I have in my kitchen cabinet? Yeah, I mean, I have so many herbs at home. It's one of the nice things about being a herbalist. I use a lot of the herbs myself, but I think some antivirals like oil of oregano that you mentioned at the beginning, powerful. Apple cider vinegar is not a herb, but it's really health tonic. What else? I go through cycles of herbs. I take a herb maybe for a month. I go through different organs, and I would take a herb for the heart, for the lungs, for the kidneys, for the liver. So I nearly as much as having a collection of herbs, you want to have 2 or 3 books. And I can recommend, you can find them on my Instagram account, a couple of good household books, that will, you'll be able to look up a remedy for cuts and grazes. Comfrey cream would be a really nice one to have. Comfrey cream is comfrey is a cell proliferant, which basically means it makes cells grow really fast, so it's really healing, and it's great for muscles and cuts and grazes. You can also have medicinal oils then as well, comfrey oil, meadowsweet oil. Meadowsweet grows along canals. Has that sheep's wool, white kind of fluff on the leaf, and you can make a medicinal oil out of that, great for arthritis. Cayenne pepper, very simple, used a lot with hot curries and so forth, but cayenne is a great heart tonic. I recommend it for anybody that's not on medication for their heart. A tip of a teaspoon in a glass of water per day. It's hot to drink, but once it goes down, it's grand. It's okay. But it's a really great for balancing blood pressure. If your blood pressure is high, it brings it down. If it's low, it brings it up, because it helps increase circulation. So they'd be the kind of ones, for the heart, cayenne, comfrey for the skin, an oil like meadowsweet, the chamomile, valerian. Yarrow also grows wild, and it's great for a lot of things because it's heating, so it'll heat up and kill those microorganisms as well. But yeah, maybe look for a nice home herbal book. You can make a few recipes. I mean, everybody should be having kind of some herbal teas in the evening. Peppermint. I mean, we buy a lot of peppermint teas, or if you can buy peppermint leaf, even better. Peppermint is really calming on digestion, as aniseed is. So peppermint would be a nice regular tea. Yeah.
Valerian root, though, I have it in the capsules. Is it okay? How long would I tend to get to sleep very easily, but I wake up very early and I can't get back to sleep.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the correlation is there, but I would like things to calm me down. I don't drink coffee anymore, for example. But my question is, valerian root, is there a certain amount of time after which you should stop taking it?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I kind of think a 12-week cycle, which is 3 months, is a nice cycle for the body to be on a herb and then take a break from it and move on to something else. Ashwagandha as well is another great adaptogen herb for stress. You can take it in capsule forms as well in a cycle of 12 weeks. The sleep thing as well, I wake up a lot at night and I go back to sleep quite quickly. It can be to do with this... with the circadian rhythms, there's this rhythm that affects the body, and different organs can wake us up. So I work with people who have insomnia. It's a very difficult thing to treat because it has a strong psychological component. But I would recommend for some people, CBD oil is quite powerful. It's the anti-anxiety alkaloid of the cannabis plant. It's sold in health shops as a food supplement, so it's quite a small 5% CBD in it, but it's very relaxing on the nervous system.
Speaking of relaxing the nervous system, and this is my last question, is there any herbs to give a dog to reduce his barking? Serious question.
Yeah, I mean, there are herbalists that work with dogs and animals and horses. I don't, but if I was to think about it using the principles of herbal medicine, I would think about, a lot to do with the dog's kind of sense of their own nervous system. Dogs have a language of their own. They communicate to us and to other dogs and animals. So, some dogs can be nervous, and they have a nervous disposition. So, you could look at trying to put, a chamomile tea with some valerian, maybe lemon balm, passion flower. There are two other lovely herbs, lemon balm, passion flower. Making up a nice drink, and give them a herbal tea and see how it goes. But I would say, a combination of petting, and
of course we do love him. I'm just wondering if there's any.
Does he bark at certain times? Or he barks at strangers?
He barks at strangers. Definitely.
Okay. Yeah.
And he just barks generally. I was reading about it, and supposedly the theory is that he's stressed from looking after the house.
Yeah, he feels a strong protective role, and he's doing that role, and he's proud.
I mean, you've seen him. He's like, you can put him in your handbag, right?
Right, and he's cute as well.
He's not the best guard dog, but he's very loud. But Tom, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to do a sign off here. If you'd like to follow Tom online, you go to the Mental Health Herbalist.
Yeah.
Fantastic, excellent. And same on YouTube.
Yeah.
Same on YouTube, and Tom does a lot of how-to, very useful videos on YouTube. If you'd like to follow me, it's Kevin Boyle Yoga. You know about the platform thing already. Thanks so much for listening or watching, and see you next week.